All right. So probably going to get going here in a minute. I'm going to do, there's two things on tap for today. Daniel Richard from Community Safety of New Hampshire will be with us maybe around 10 or 15 minutes after the hour. He's got a standing commitment that ends, I think, at around now. So he should be joining us. And then prior to that, I'd like to do a little bit of a so-called training on how to get going with our legislative contacts. Some people have some questions on how to find their way around the website. So I'm going to go ahead and just share my screen because I don't want to take too much time away from anyone else. And so I want to just get this going here. Let's see here. Share. All right. So you should be looking at basically email I just sent out. And if you've noticed, I've got these hyperlinked, these two bills here, hyperlinked HB 187 and HB 604. Both of them are taking place today in terms of committee hearings. And so the hyperlinks lead to the bills themselves. So if you click on HB 187, you get the HTML version of the bill, and it tells you what it does. Typically, it gives a small description up at the top here relative to the emergency powers. That doesn't exactly tell you what it's trying to do. But then if you go under the analysis, it's trying to rein in the emergency powers, basically. And then you can read specific stuff down here.
It's okay.
If you want to get into the weeds of the bill. And then that was HB 187, and then HB 604 is over here. Expanding the New Hampshire Vaccine Association to include adult vaccines. This spends like $1 million on hiring 9 people to do monitoring and puts people, taxpayers on the hook potentially for millions more. Anyway, that's how you get a hold of the bills. And in this email, I also said to sign up and or testify, go to this page here. So I'll show you what that page looks like. You get to the House of Representatives. Right now, House bills are being discussed in the House and Senate bills are being discussed in the Senate. Then they cross over sometime, usually late in March, and are taken up by the opposite House. So for example, so you want to look at something that's happening today, select a committee, say it's House, and then look at, say, either one of these here, 604, then select an option. You are a member of the public, unless you're not, you're representing yourself. Then you sign in by supporting or opposing the bill, right? And if you wish to speak on the bill, you would click here. And then click in your amount of time in minutes needed for testimony. Recommendation 3 minutes. 2 minutes is even better. And then you can hit continue, and it'll take you to the next screen where you can basically confirm what you're doing. Also, in here you'll see, in order you can email all members of the committee here. So, for example, clicking on this email will open up an email. Presumably, will open up an email in your email program, and doesn't really matter here. So there it goes. And so you'll get an email. This gets sent to every member of the committee. Dear honorable representatives, first you would type I oppose HB 604, expanding vaccines, dear honorable representatives. Then you give your pitch. Should be originally stated. Do not copy paste from somewhere else, because the reps will not appreciate that, because it just gives them a lot more to read, and it tells them that you're not really thinking for yourself. I know it's extra work. I'm sorry. This is just the way it works here in New Hampshire. Then you'll also notice in the email here, if you want to find your representative, you click right here, and this will bring you to House of Representatives. Select a member. if you know who it is, but if you don't know, you can go to your town, click on your town, and then it'll bring up who's who in your ward and in your district, and then you can click on their names and you can email them, basically. So that's how that works. And one other thing, you can go to, let's see here, where is it here? Project Vote Smart if you want, votesmart.org up here. And then you can go down to this part of the page where it's blue, type in your zip code plus your 4-digit extension on your zip code. And that will bring up a page that looks like this, which will be calculated specifically for your house, basically your ward, et cetera. Then you just click on whichever one you want to, in this case, state legislature. This tells you, in this case, me, who are my floatarials and who's my regular person. Then I would just click on their name and either get more information. Typically, if this is on VoteSmart, you might be able to get information. Some of these people are new and won't necessarily have anything on VoteSmart, but you can go back to this site here, and you can see that, in fact, this was accurate. And you click on their name here, and you'll get his email address there, get other information on what bills they're sponsoring, et cetera, et cetera. All right, so are there any questions that anyone would like to ask about just contacting your reps? Anything I just showed, you can go back and look at the video if you want, but that's pretty much how that works. And any questions from anybody? All right, and I see Daniel is on, so that's great. And again, if any of the attendees want to be on camera or even just be able to talk on mic, you can just say so in the chat, and we'll promote you up to that. And you can also ask a question in the chat. And before I get going with Daniel, are there any comments or any other? I kind of just jumped right in there and didn't give anyone an opportunity to make any comments just to get us started today. Any of our panelists have anything they'd like to throw into the mix before we get started with Daniel?
Well, yes, I want to thank you a lot for doing this. I've been able to be more active in the past, but I know these tools that you showed us in which you can do it, and I need to, in spite of my resistance to spend this much time on the internet and don't find my way as easily around as you do, but you're showing us the way. I think it's incredibly important that as many of us as possible take part in these things. So I want to thank you.
You're welcome. And I do want to encourage people to go to rebuildnewhampshire.com and also HFNH, Health Freedom New Hampshire, hfnh.org, and then click on bills. If you go to the latter or the former, both of them have sections on bills. If you look at my last email, I include a link to Health Freedom New Hampshire, the one I sent out today for the 1-hour Zoom notice. And I also included a section from Health Freedom New Hampshire, their latest email on bills coming up this week. It's hugely important. You need to sign in, say whether you oppose or support the bill, and then write to the committee. At least do that and give them at least a paragraph on why you think the bill is a bad idea or a good idea. And then please track, follow Rebuild New Hampshire and Health Freedom New Hampshire to track what's going on. Rebuild focuses a little bit more on the scaling back government overreach, ending executive powers, executive orders, et cetera. And also they're also tracking the health ones, and Health Freedom New Hampshire is mostly just tracking the health ones, but they'll also have additional information, sometimes from Western Aid Prize Foundation, sometimes what maybe Larissa puts up there from her other doings. So it's really good to have these, to have these resources in the state, and we rely on our partners to help us get the word out. That way, we're all doing the things that we can do. So anyway, anybody else have any comments? All right, well, then I would love to introduce Daniel Richard of the New Hampshire Community of Safety. Daniel, can you hear me?
I can. How about me?
All right. Thank you so much for coming in today. Love your background. And we're just going to jump right in, I guess, and just maybe start by just telling people a little bit about yourself.
Absolutely. Thank you for the invitation. I'm Canadian born. I was born in Sherbrooke, 100 miles from here. And parents immigrated here in the 60s. Grew up in Manchester. I think I got here in 1967. Grew up in Manchester, was naturalized to the state in 1981. I became a New Hampshire citizen. I also joined the U.S. Air Force at that time, did 5 years on active duty, and I came home and had fallen in love with dogs and dog training, and that's what I've spent most of my adult life, culminating in being the head trainer for the U.S. Department of Energy. I had 10 bomb dogs under my command, protecting our natural resources. After the oil embargo of the 70s, the American government had taken and preserved 4 locations where we have all our emergency oil is pumped into the ground. So because it's a national security protocol, there is, all this high-speed security, including, two bomb dogs at every location. So that's my background. I'm not hearing you.
Sorry, yes. Please give us a capsule overview of what the Committee of Safety is, maybe just a tiny bit of its history. I know you could go into the weeds on this, and it's fascinating, really,
Right.
because it goes all the way back to the beginning. But yeah, just give us kind of a tiny intro, because I do want there to be plenty of time for you to talk about what's going on today. But I think people will be fascinated to hear its origins.
Yeah, for me, my journey begins approximately 6-7 years ago when I started studying the state constitution, understanding that there are 51 constitutions. That's not what we're taught in school. There's the 50 sovereign states, and each of those states has its own constitution, and one constitution, the US Constitution, that ties them all together. So it's a big part of the missing story, which is part of what I started teaching. So I ended up teaching a class, a constitutional class on Wednesday nights, and one of the participants was anxious to do more. What else can we do other than learn our rights? And that led to my introducing what the Founding Fathers did. When the Founding Fathers found themselves with no functioning government when they ran the King of England out of town, his representative, the colonial governor, Governor Wentworth, they put a cannon in front of his building, in front of his home in Portsmouth or over in Hampton, and said, "You need to go. We're all set with your conduct." So they ran him out of town. And this happened, by the way, in all of the 13 original colonies. All the Founding Fathers were members of their committees of safety. Committees of safety were an elected office. It was a temporary elected executive. So it composes of, here in New Hampshire, it was called the Provincial Congress. The Provincial Congress was referring to the territory of New Hampshire as a province, an English province. So provincial, and then Congress meaning assembly. So the makeup of the remnants of those people. Now, after they ran Governor Wentworth out of town, they drafted their first constitution, which was the first of the 13 colonies, on January 5th, 1776. But it was a temporary document that wasn't ratified by the people. In other words, the people of New Hampshire didn't consent to this rule of government. It was strictly a temporary instrument. And of course, what happens after that is that all the other states follow suit as the Revolutionary War, shortly thereafter, because this is January of 1776. 6 months later, we have the famous Declaration of Independence. And meanwhile, all the other 12 states start writing and ratifying their own constitutions. So that's where the Committee of Safety concept came from. The Committee of Safety evolved into committees of correspondence, committees of supply, and it was a temporary transitional government that receded the moment that the new government was put in place. In other words, once the people agreed to a new form of government by their written constitution, the members of the Committee of Safety were all absorbed into this new functioning government. So that's basically the backstory of where and why the Committee of Safety comes into play. And so I recommended this to my group. I said, look, this is another step that we can take. And so we've created this new concept. And that's all it is, by the way. There's no physical committee of safety yet. Now, why would you need a committee of safety? Because if the people of New Hampshire exercise their constitutional right under Article 10, the right of revolution, you need a plan. You just don't declare, your right of revolution without having a plan. And so the plan would be to the people of New Hampshire would then choose to hold an election and elect a committee of safety as a temporary element if they so choose to. Again, this has to be the will of the people. It's not for one person or one small group to just prop this up. So the committee of safety as a concept now exists strictly for three specific goals. One, to promote education and awareness of what your rights are. If you don't know what your rights are, you don't have any. Two, to promote committee men and committee watchmen to start becoming involved in their communities at all levels, from the local school board to your local politics, because there's an old saying, politics is always practiced by the majority of those who participate. If you don't participate, don't complain about the form of government you have, which is how we got to today. That's why we're in such a hot mess. People of New Hampshire stopped paying attention to their responsibility of being involved, and now we have all of this tyranny. So that's basically the backstory as to how the COSNH came to be. The last element, by the way, is to bring legal actions either by remonstrating the legislative process or bringing legal action in court. So those are the three elements: education, activism, and then litigation if necessary in the courts or the legislature.
Great. And now there is a remonstrance that you put together. You want to talk a little bit about that?
There are two. The first one that was filed was filed almost 2 years ago. March 20th of 2019, I filed a remonstrance over the unconstitutional voting laws. And what had happened was, once I had become aware of how voting fraud was being perfected in New Hampshire, and I mean perfected because they have done exactly that. Once I figured out how they were basically, what we have now is this: the legislature and the executive now choose how they elect themselves. That's outrageous. They are no longer being constrained by the voting qualifications defined by the people themselves, which is Article 11 in the Bill of Rights. Within that construct, in all the other places in the state constitution, those who are endowed with political rights, those who can elect or be elected to office, political rights, are defined by the state constitution in the 20 places they're referred to as inhabitants. It's the legal word for a qualified voter. A resident is an alien. A resident alien is someone who lives in the state who has no voting rights, because you are a citizen of the United States who's moved to New Hampshire. It doesn't automatically confer automatic citizenship. Now, I can prove this with great detail because I uncovered all the voting laws from the conception of 1783 to the current. I read them all, and I found the most important one, which is in 1808, 20 years after the adaptation of the U.S. Constitution. New Hampshire writes its very detailed voting law, chapter 49, that says exactly this: that if you move here from any state in the union, that upon arriving here, you had to reside in the state for 2 years to prove to the inhabitants, the community of New Hampshire, that you're a good person. That's why the federal government does the same thing. The policy is the same. When I had immigrated here and I had a green card, I was subject to federal jurisdiction. If I broke New Hampshire law, if I didn't pay the taxes and pay the bills and be a good citizen and assimilate into New Hampshire, they could deport me. And so that's the reasoning and the logic behind being a resident. But again, a resident is not someone, look it up in Article 11. The word resident doesn't appear in any provision in the Constitution as being endowed with the right to vote. Matter of fact, the word resident only appears in our Constitution in one place, in direct opposition of inhabitant. So think about that. The word inhabitant is used 20 times to define voters. Resident is not defined for any other reason than they're subject to our taxes and subject to our laws. They have no right to vote.
So how is it, I have this conversation with people every now and again who, talk about state assemblies and committees of safety. And I point out that the, people with the guns are in control, and there may be a piece of paper somewhere, or there may be a law somewhere that says they shouldn't be, but why are they going to be paying attention to a group like this? If we join you, why will they pay attention to us? Why will they make any special notice of the remonstrance? And what can we do about it if they simply rebuff us? What is our realistic path to overturning government tyranny here?
Absolutely. So
Small question, I know, small question.
Yeah, no, let's finish up on the remonstrance, the first one that I filed. So that was over. I just explained to your audience what it was about. The backstory is the Democrats decided to conceal it. They committed federal crimes. You can't conceal anything filed with the clerk of any court on the land, whether it's a local municipal court, Superior Court, Supreme Court, or the legislature, the general court. Once you are filed that document, you're entitled to due process. And Article 31 of our state constitution is very clear. Matter of fact, I'm going to scroll to it and quote exactly what it says, which is that the legislature shall assemble, and it reads the following: the legislature shall assemble for redress of grievances. Not maybe, not if it feels like it. And so they refused. What they've done is they've omitted the previous rules that provided a cause of action, what they call a statutory cause of action, which says that when someone files a document, A, B, and C are supposed to happen. So the remonstrance used to fall under the joint rules that read the following. This was in effect for 212 years. It was removed in 1996. Quote, when a convention of the two houses is to be formed, whether by a requirement of the Constitution or by a vote or resolve of the two houses, a message shall be sent from the House of Representatives to the Senate. This is what they're refusing to do. By removing the rule, unless I take them to court, they're going to continue. I had an unfortunate conversation with Sherman Packard, the Speaker of the House, and Paul Smith, the Clerk of the House of Representatives. And they're going to deny me again. They're going to deny all of us the fundamental right to hold our government accountable until I force them in court. So last year, I prepared a writ of mandamus. A writ of mandamus is when you file a brief with the court to compel a public official to do that job they're required to do, but they're refusing to do for A, B, and C reasons. Doesn't matter why. That's the legal remedy that I'm going to effectuate. I'm getting ready to file it here soon. So that's what's happened so I refiled the old remonstrance, put a new cover sheet on it, and basically threw them all under the bus and said, look, you denied me, back in 2019. We're now 2 years later, and you want to deny me again. So what's going to happen is that I was very sad to discover when you ask the important question, what can we do about this? What I was sad to discover is that there are no statutes on the books. There are no laws on the books in New Hampshire that cause a criminal or civil penalty for a state official to violate your constitutional rights. So if they do it, there's no remedy other than the remonstrance. But there is at the federal level. And the federal levels, because of the 14th Amendment and Reconstruction and the enactment of what's called the Black Codes and the Ku Klux Klan statutes, which is the federal law that makes it a felony, that if any state shall deprive its citizens of its constitutional rights protected by the federal government, that you could then prosecute them in federal court. That is my next remedy. That the lawsuit is written. I'm getting it updated now as we speak. And so I'll be suing them in federal court for a very simple violation, deprivation of due process or redress of grievance, which is a First Amendment right in the US Constitution and codified in the state. And then also due process of law, which is in the Fifth Amendment and also in the 14th Amendment, that no state shall deprive its citizens of due process of law. So those will be the litigation that, unfortunately, had I not taken the time to educate myself and teach myself how to function in the court of law, I would be crippled. I would be crippled because without being a multimillionaire that could afford to hire a prominent law firm, you'd have no redress. You'd have no legal redress. And that's what makes what their conduct is absolutely appalling. I predict that once the people of the state wake up to what their public officials have been doing to them for a long time, there'll be some hangings. But it's going to take time. It's going to take time because we didn't get here overnight. And so the tyranny, unfortunately, is going to continue. And until the people finally have had enough and bad things start to happen, it's coming. I'm not going to do it, but human behavior is predictable, isn't it?
Yes, when I think enough people show up and understand what's going on. So how are your efforts going in terms of organizing in the state? And what kind of support are you getting from others around the lawsuit?
I'm getting a lot of support, and we're growing in leaps and bounds far beyond what we ever anticipated, strictly on the platform of educating people about the state constitution. People are waking up. Really? I have 39 rights. I have 39 enumerated, unalienable rights. Never mind that there's even more than that just simply aren't written down. And so people are fascinated by that. The other thing they're fascinated by, I can be a state citizen, really? And I say, yes, only state citizens are entitled to vote. And by the way, everything that I've shared with your audience today is reaffirmed by Bill Gardner, the Secretary of State, who I've built a friendship and alliance with. He has called me and he's given me permission to repeat this very flattering comment that he bestowed upon me, which was, Dan, you know more about the state constitution than anybody I've ever met. You know more than the lawyers do. You know more than the judges do. How do we get your depth of knowledge out there? And that's what led to his invitation for me to teach constitutional law to him and his entire legal staff. And I intervened in a federal lawsuit over this very issue because I'm right on the facts. Now, the infrastructure, the status quo, doesn't want to give me the time of day because once they get found out, some of them are going to jail. But in the meantime, the whole process of exposing the awareness. Now, you mentioned something earlier. You asked about how we're growing and how that's going. But let me make a left turn for a minute. There are other groups out there that I want to warn you about. New Hampshire Assembly, the T. Rowe Group, the United States of America. Now, the reason I'm giving you a warning is there are people out there who are advocating a status correction. You've got to change your status. You've got to be an American national or some other derivative of some form of claim that if you change your legal documentation, that somehow you'll be immune from those men in black robes and the men in wearing badges and guns. And that simply isn't true. As long as those people, as long as the status quo continue to have a badge and have a gun and have a courtroom, you're going to jail. So you can't change your status and make yourself immune. And that's what they're preaching and that's what they're teaching. It's a very dangerous thing. The New Hampshire Assembly is following a woman called Judge Anna Von Reitz, who simply declared herself self-professed. She's never gone to law school. She's never practiced in any courtroom in the state of Alaska, but she calls herself a judge. And what she did is she took remember I alluded to in the beginning of this conversation that each of the 13 states or colonies became states? Well, Virginia adopted its own immigration policy in 1788 because the federal government had yet to be created, and as well as the Articles of Confederation hadn't been created either. Now, for those of you who don't know, the Articles of Confederation is the precursor, is the first Constitution. All those 13 colonies that have now united, declared themselves sovereign and independent from the king, write a commercial contract called the Articles of Confederation. So back to Anna Von Reitz, that's her name. So she takes the immigration policy of Virginia and makes a fantastic leap and then says, we were all Americans from the beginning, completely ignoring the fact that there were 13 colonies with 13 charters and 13 state constitutions And it is those 13 who write the US Constitution. She ignores all that. And in order to follow their logic and their philosophy, you have to ignore history. So same with the T. Rowe Group. The T. Rowe Group is now advocating that they have their own passports, their own currency, that they have their own money, their own passports, their own means to travel, and that they're getting some relief that when people make these claims, all these groups, including our political parties, are all fundamentally a PMA, a private member association. Anyone can create a private member association. United States politics, from its inception, we are in the 6th generation of a two-party system. Our two-party system began with the Federalist and the Anti-Federalist, right? That's who Thomas Jefferson and Patrick Henry and George Mason, they were the Anti-Federalists. They were the true conservatives. James Madison, Alexander Hamilton, they were all the Federalists. They were the ones that wanted a central government, a parliamentary monarchy type government, which is what they knew as Englishmen. So that plays itself out, but that's the short history on private member associations, and they changed their names through times. Remember, the Republican Party was called the Democratic Republican Party. That's what Jefferson was a part of. So the names are really irrelevant. And today, by the way, both parties, both the left and right platform, whether you're a Democrat or can call yourself a Republican, you're a socialist, both party platforms, go to them when we're done this call. Go look up the DNC, the New Hampshire Democratic Party, and then look up the New Hampshire Republican Party. One is blue, one is red, and both advocate a social legislative agenda that achieves the same thing, socialism. Now, why do I call it socialism? It's because they want to change the function of New Hampshire's government by legislative action. They don't want to do it by a 2/3 majority of getting everyone to that's the genius of what the founding fathers of New Hampshire gave us. That is our inheritance, that the only way to grow government, like I said, in 1850, they proposed 15 changes to our government. And the people said no. A Department of Education, a Department of Agriculture, a Department of Railroad, getting rid of the Executive Council for a lieutenant governor, changing to having 30 senators and redistricting the state. They said, no, we don't want that. And so that's the power of the genius of the founding fathers, which is government is derived, what? From the consent of the governed. It's declared in the Declaration of Independence. It's the very first article in our state constitution. Our state constitution, the very first article says the following: all men are born equally free and independent. Therefore, all government of right originates from the people, is founded in consent, and is instituted for the general good. Founded in consent is repeated over and over and over again. Let me get to Article 12, the protection contract, right? Article 12. Every member of the community has a right to be protected by it. What is it? It is the state constitution. And who is protected by it? Every member. So even if you can't vote, you're still entitled to be protected. Exactly. Thank you for that. Up at the top, Article 12, right? Go ahead and highlight it. Excellent. Every member of the community has a right to be protected by it in the enjoyment of his life, liberty, and property. Back up a second, scroll up to the top of the page. Article 2. What's Article 2 say? Natural rights. All men have certain natural, essential, and inherent rights, among which are the enjoying and defending life, liberty, acquiring, possessing, and protecting property. That's much stronger than the Declaration of Independence, isn't it? And then, of course, in a word, seeking and obtaining happiness. Back to Article 12. So it's reaffirming what? That this is a social compact, that everyone who agrees to live in New Hampshire will agree to this contract. And so to protect his life, liberty, and property. Now, here's the catch. He is therefore bound to contribute his share in the expense of such protection. The quid, the pro, and the quo. There's the expense, there's the tax. There is the commercial contract. You have a protection contract. By virtue of being a taxpayer, you have a right to drag your public servants before a court and demand that they perform a lawful function. The Constitution. Now, here's the last and most important point, and then I'll open it up to questions. But no part, the middle part there, would you click on that? To yield, oh, by the way, to contribute his expense to such protection, and the last part, to yield his personal service when necessary. What does that mean? That means that when you're recalled as a member of the militia, or if you're called to jury duty, grand jury, petit jury, and lastly but not leastly, if you are called up to or need to serve in public office at the local town, whether it be, you know, helping with the elections, town clerk, local office, local school board, all those are part of your civic responsibilities as a state citizen. And the last part, the second half, is what I call, so to yield his personal service when necessary. Would you highlight from but no part of a man's property? All right. This isn't just about eminent domain. This also goes to taking away any of your constitutional rights, because your constitutional rights are your property. Read James Madison's dissertation on property. But no part of a man's property shall be taken from him or applied to public uses without his own consent. There's that word again, consent, right? Or that of the representative body of the people. Who are they talking about? Who's the representative body of the people? It's you. It's everyone on this call. The representative body of the people are the lawmakers, because only the people through a 2/3 majority can amend this written constitution, because it was written by who? The people. And only the people. So the people are the author of the form of government, and only they can make laws they're subject to, because it's about to say exactly that. So the last sentence, highlight that, nor, start at nor. Nor are the inhabitants of this state controllable by any other laws than those which they or their representative body, the voters, have given their consent. How about the mask rules, the vaccine, the shelter in place? When did the legislature ever assemble? When did we, the people, give the government any authority to do these things? We didn't.
So let me ask you a question, because that's a perfect, I see some people clapping at that. Let me ask you a question in light of natural rights.
Yes.
This is Article 2,
Yes.
which you described, but in light of where is it here? There's another one here having to do with, maybe you can tell me oh yeah, right here, society, it's organized.
Ah, excellent. That's your divorce clause, by the way.
But let me just ask you though, when men enter into a state of society, they surrender up some of their natural rights to that society in order to ensure the protection of others. And so let me ask you, in regards to what the governor and others are claiming as their right to have us surrender certain rights in order to protect others from getting COVID, shall we, if you believe in that story, how do these two interact with each other? The natural rights that we have, which is essentially the beginning of the Declaration of Independence, you are all created equal. We have the right to life, liberty, pursuit of happiness, and as you said here a little bit more in our Constitution. How do you see that balancing? Are they using this properly or improperly?
Well, they're using it improperly, because what they're doing, I'll explain the police power of the state in a minute. As it pertains to this very specific passage, is that this is reaffirmed in a constitutional test. There exists an 1831 printing of a teaching constitution that has 259 yes or question and answer teaching constitution. In that instrument, published in 1831, it addresses this very important question. In order to ensure the protection of others. Go ahead and highlight that. What they're referring to is it's declared right up above. In order to protect life, liberty, and property, it's very specific what the government is there to protect. Part 2 form of government exists to protect your rights, not your health. Your rights, not your health.
But wouldn't they argue that, I'm being obviously devil's advocate here, because I'm not just really disagreeing with you, but wouldn't they argue that they're protecting other people's life, which is the very first thing there?
You're absolutely right that they are arguing that, but failing to develop their argument. They simply claim that's what they're doing, but they never do come out and prove their point. I'll expound on that. I read the lawsuit against Governor Sununu, which was filed immediately after the first emergency orders, called the Binford case. Representative David Binford sued the governor, claiming that the restrictions now being placed upon him were unconstitutional and interfering with his ability to go to church and his inability to run for public office, because we were in the middle of the election cycle. And the court heard testimony on behalf of the governor from Daniel Will. Daniel Will is the Solicitor General. It was Gordon McDonald's right-hand man. He's the one who argues the cases on behalf of the state. He told the court that what they were doing was constitutional, but never proved it. Simply, and by the way, what they did is they accused Dan Hines, the legal counsel for David Binford and Holly Bean and the other person. They accused them of never developing their argument. So if I say to you that you violated my constitutional rights, I'm being vague. But if I say you suspended my First Amendment right to free speech by putting a muzzle on me, now I'm citing the article, now I'm citing the crime. So I'm being specific. So the Solicitor General argues that the plaintiff never articulated or developed their complaint. They never proved that they were an injured party. They never developed their complaint. They themselves did the same thing. In the very last sentence in the lawsuit, in the Binford case, and this is how I testified against Gordon McDonald's nomination. I argued before the executive council, said this man is not fit to be a judge because his previous conduct is evidence is how he will conduct himself in the future, which is, instead of identifying that there are actually 6 provisions in the state constitution that make their conduct illegal, in other words, that the executive can't exercise the power or the prerogative of the legislative branch, he ignored that and basically argued case law, citing, for example, Hurricane Andrew, when there was a curfew put in place because of a natural disaster of a Category 5 hurricane to keep looting and all types of bad behavior in control while they regain some type of civilized society. They cite that as their authority while never actually citing any constitutional authority for doing what they're doing, ignoring the provisions that say that they can't do it. So what I'd like you to do is pull up screen share and go to Part 2, Form of Government, Article 5.
Form of
We'll start with,
government,
yes,
yeah,
form
okay.
of government. Start there, form of government.
Should be able to do that.
Okay, go to number 3 first. The general court, when to meet and dissolve, right? The next thing is the power of the general court to make courts. I'm sorry, back up a second. All the way up to the top. Okay. Number 2, what does number 2 say? The supreme legislative power within the state shall be vested in the Senate or House of Representatives, each which shall have a negative on the other. I argued this very point before the Executive Council. I said, look, the power, the police power of the state, when you ask about COVID and the lockdown and how that's interfered with our life, many lawyers and many courts have heard testimony over what is called Jacobson versus Massachusetts, which is the famous vaccine case in 1905. Alan Dershowitz famously was on television saying, the state can force vaccinate you against your will, right? Here's the part that everyone left out. You have to read the case. If you read the case, you'll discover that this is exactly what happened. Massachusetts being concerned. New Hampshire, by the way, in the 1830s had the same problem with smallpox. Does anyone on this call realize that the state constitution already has a provision for infectious disease? Article 43. The limited power of the governor was regulated strictly so that he could relocate the legislature. We'll go there in a minute, but I'm making the point that the police power in the Jacobson case, the Massachusetts legislature was concerned about the health pandemic called smallpox. They assembled the legislature. They brought in testimony of the doctors and the medical experts of the day in the year 1905. And back then, there wasn't the body of evidence that there was a vaccine court and there was all these potential ramifications. They didn't know how injurious vaccines could be in 1905. So they did what? The legislature assembled, they heard testimony, the legislature did its job. The police power lies. The supreme legislative power should also be called the police power of the state, belongs with the legislative body, not the executive. The executive can only exercise that power which is delegated to him, which was reaffirmed also by a federal case recently. The Governor Whitmer, everyone knows Governor Whitmer in Michigan, right? She was national news about the emergency orders. Her orders were different. Michigan had a sunset clause. 28 days after her declaration of emergency, required the legislature to get involved. In other words, she couldn't auto-renew. Sununu is auto-renewing. He keeps renewing these emergency provisions, right? She couldn't do that. So a medical group sued her in federal court. They claimed that she was violating their constitutional rights under federal law. So the federal court, respecting state jurisdiction and federal jurisdiction, certified two questions and asked the Michigan Supreme Court to answer the following two questions. Did the governor of Michigan violate the state statute by going around the legislature when she auto-renewed their emergency powers? And the answer was yes, she did. 5-4 split. Republicans 5, Democrats 4. Question 2. Are the emergency provision statutes given by the legislature to the executive constitutional? Unanimous vote, no. That has a direct bearing on New Hampshire. It's called non-delegation doctrine. No branch of government can give away its authority to another branch of government. That's why we have separation of powers. So this is the backstory to that litigation. Unfortunately, here in New Hampshire, we've had no law firm bring a competent case, a legitimate case before our courts that would overturn this. So I'm completely disgusted with our legal society. I have several friends that are lawyers, and I say they're all scumbags. They're all scumbags because none of them, knowing better and having the legal skill and the legal talent. I am not the only person endowed with this knowledge in the state, and they have done zippo, nothing. Because why? Because no one in the state is rich enough to pay their law firm. Disgusting.
Indeed, indeed. So that was quite a little masterclass, and we're about 10 minutes to the hour, and I'm just wondering if now might be a good time to take questions, or did you want to make more commentary on the Constitution?
No, I think that's, I mean, I put a lot on the table there. And so if I could convey one thing to your membership, the most important thing is this. Law is made by the people, the law of the land. Do me a favor, pull up the state constitution again, go all the way to the end.
Let's see here.
Let me see where you open up, and then I'll tell you where to go.
Okay.
Pull it back up.
Screen. So,
all right, scroll down, go back to Bill of Rights.
Rights.
Article 15. Okay, at the very end down here, halfway through, it says, no subject shall be arrested, imprisoned, or despoiled or deprived of his property, immunities, or privileges. Highlight that.
15, no subject. Here we go.
And then stop down there where it gets to, where it says the law of the land. You're going to get to a point where it says, right there, law of the land. Go to that semicolon right there. Stop, that's good. The rest of that is an addition in 1984 about mental competency for if you're deemed mentally incompetent to stand trial. That was in the Article 15 read all the way to the semicolon for more than 200 years. So it's very profoundly important, and let me read it. No subject shall be arrested, imprisoned, despoiled, or deprived of his property. There's that word again, deprived of his property, immunities or privileges, put out of the protection of the law, exiled or deprived of his life, liberty. There's those words again, right? Or estate, but by the judgment of his peers. That isn't just the grand jury that's supposed to operate at a county level independent from the judicial branch. Because remember, the grand jury and the petit jury do not emanate from any branch of government, but rather they are derived from the Bill of Rights itself, which is right here. But by the judgment of his peers. There's a lot of study that goes into that very passage that goes back to Magna Carta. What does that mean? But also by the judgment of your peers is also back to Article 12, right? That only the people can make the laws. The people are the lawmakers. They're the author of this, the law of the land, which is the last piece. Or the law of the land. What is the law of the land? Go all the way to the end of the Constitution, Article 101. Click out of here. Scroll all the way down to the bottom. Click there. Go all the way to the bottom. What's this say? This form of government shall be enrolled on parchment and deposited in the secretary's office and be part of the laws of the land. Now you get it? Only the people make the law. The legislature can only do what? Act pursuant to the Constitution. That's why in the Supremacy Clause, it says, Article 6 of the U.S. Constitution says, this Constitution and the laws of the United States, which shall be written pursuant thereof, is very profoundly important. Don't you think that the 13 colonies that wrote the document meant the same thing at the state level? Of course they did. The Constitution, state and federal, is the laws of the land, and the legislatures are bound by those instruments. And only through the ignorance of our society and the apathy of our culture are we abused by this tyranny, because the people don't know their rights. And I'll close with that and go to questions.
Thank you, Daniel. Wow, that was just an awesome miniature introduction to things that we ought to already know. But let me open it up. Anybody would like to ask a question relative to what they just heard, especially if it's relative to what we're going through now, which is, rolling back the executive overreach, et cetera. Please just chime in. Go ahead. Anybody? I think you might have stumped the panel. I do have a question here from David on the Q&A. How does the New Hampshire Constitution apply to legal residents? He said, quote unquote, resident aliens who are non-US citizens?
Well, there are three categories. There are three categories of people. There are those who are native born here in New Hampshire. Then there are those like me who immigrate from outside of New Hampshire from a foreign country. So that would be a green card holder, a lawful permanent resident alien, right? And upon meeting the residency requirement established by federal law, you are then entitled to become a citizen of the state. Remember, the federal government itself, when you look up immigration law and you look up the definition of naturalization, the word naturalization says specifically the act of conferring the nationality of a state upon any person after birth. Remember, the United States government was created as a body corporate and a body politic. James Madison said so 3 times in Philadelphia in 1787. So the federal government was created to do the corporate interest, to protect. You could really summarize the federal government and its enumerated powers to do 4 things: wage war, negotiate peace on behalf of the states, contract international treaties and alliances for commerce, and to regulate international commerce between the states, foreign countries, and Indian tribes.
We have another question here from John. He says, why don't you know that the Declaration stands above the Constitution as our supreme law?
The Declaration of Independence?
I guess that's what he means. Yep.
The Declaration of Independence has, first of all, it's a beautiful document. What it goes to the heart of is it's not a law, first and foremost. Let's make that clear. Because prior to the Declaration of Independence, even New Hampshire isn't a legitimate entity yet. Why? Because of the consent clause, right? What does the Declaration of Independence say? That all legitimate government comes from the consent of the governed, right? There isn't any consent of the 13 colonies that sent signers to the Declaration of Independence to pass off on it. Secondarily, US Supreme Court, there are many people who have brought legal actions citing the preamble of the Declaration. It doesn't bring you any remedy. It's not law. It is the original intent of what the framers intended, which leads into what happens next. What happens after the Declaration of Independence? All 13 states write a constitution. It is only from that point in history, I would argue in New Hampshire, that the rule of law in New Hampshire is not binding until October 31st, 1783, 30 days after the Treaty of Paris, where the King of England relinquished all claims to the land. Remember, the Declaration of Independence is a divorce letter. They're divorcing, the states are declaring themselves to be free, sovereign, and independent of the king. It's a divorce letter. It's not illegal. It doesn't have any effect until the King of England does what? He signs the Treaty of Paris and he relinquishes all claims. So the Declaration of Independence is not a sovereign document. It's a original intent.
John, I just opened up your microphone. Did you want to ask any follow-up questions?
Yeah, you missed a big part of the Declaration of Independence. I'm going to cite a few words from it. One, by authority of the good people of these colonies, which made the 300 million of us the authorities in this country above all of our elected servants and
Right.
above the cops.
Sure.
Number two, that they are absolved from all allegiance to the British Crown,
Right.
which contains the bar, which meant that attorneys cannot practice their brutal and blind force disguised as law in our country. And it gave us the right and the duty to throw off such government after a long train of abuses, such as the existence of the Federal Reserve, attorneys in our government, the owners of the Federal Reserve owning all the TV networks, and attacking us with a hoax pandemic. That's the law. The Supremacy Clause is taken out of context from the Constitution. It only applies to judges, but there's no penalty when the judge is violated. You can't throw the judge in jail for refusing to adhere to the Supremacy Clause, even though you should.
Understood, John. And John, I'm going to repeat what I said before, which is this. If you abide by the Declaration itself and the provision that it has to be from the consent of the governed, the problem is that prior to the Declaration of Independence, you're in a transitionary stage of government. This is where the committees of safety are now operating. So the 300 million people, first of all, the population isn't that when the instrument is written, but secondarily, there is no, it represents the will of the people who signed the document. None of the people, remember, where is the commission from any of the signers of the Declaration of Independence? New Hampshire has one. Did you know New Hampshire signed its own Declaration of Independence before it sent its delegates And its delegates were what? A bunch of volunteers, because New Hampshire has yet at that time to have ratified any form of government. So you don't have the consent of the governed prior to the Declaration of Independence. The Declaration of Independence is not a legally binding document.
It's a lawfully binding document, and nothing is legally binding because we absolved ourselves from allegiance to the enemies of humanity known as attorneys. Don't you understand the original 13th Amendment that barred attorneys from working anywhere in our government? Article 1, Section 9 that barred them, in that phrase in our supreme law, the last paragraph, that absolved us from all allegiance to that criminal entity known as the Bar Association.
John, I completely agree with the disgust of the Bar Association. I consider myself extraordinarily well versed in the Federal Reserve System and its corruption and its effects on history since its beginning and before then, as well as the original 13th Amendment. I actually have a copy of the original 13th Amendment within the construct of a state, within a copy of a constitution. So I understand that construct as well. But again, the separation from the lawyers, remember, the provision there, you keep going back to the same provision and not citing any authority. Where's the authority from the people to have this Declaration of Independence binding?
We won the war. That's where the authority came from. We won the American Revolution.
And when was the Treaty of Paris?
Huh?
When was the Treaty of Paris?
1783.
So wouldn't
And
you?
if lawyers were involved in that, then we should void the damn treaty and write a new constitution without any lawyers, Democrats or Republicans allowed to participate.
Well, I agree with your sentiment, but unfortunately, that's not going to happen.
Well, we're the authorities, and if you don't want your freedom, then you can decide that someone else is the authorities, like lawyers. You can take their bullshit for the rest of your life instead of saying, hey, lawyers, get out of our country. You can't practice your brutal and blind force disguised as law. It isn't law.
I agree. I agree with your sentiment. I'm not disagreeing with your sentiment at all. The problem is that what are we going to do about it? So let's get back to what is real, what's tangible, what can we do about it?
I'll tell you exactly what we can do about it. We do what our country never did, and that's to unite the 300 million of us as the authorities above our servants so that we can give them orders instead of appealing to them with polite letters and asking them to do the right thing.
Well, that is your prerogative, and I wish you every success and every, I can't tell you how pleased I would be if you could succeed at what you just said. So for me, in my efforts, it's really simple. I take it from a more perspective, or from this perspective. The state of New Hampshire becomes a sovereign entity when the people of this state, the land jurisdiction of New Hampshire, ratify its own constitution. They then send delegates to Philadelphia in 1787 to do what? To create a federal institution to amend the Articles of Confederation. Did that abolish state sovereignty? No. The state sovereignty clause, Article 7, the 9th and 10th Amendment are still there. My efforts are to take back the state. We can't take back the United States of America until we take care of our own local affairs, because who's the US Constitution binding on?
It's not binding on anyone because there's no enforcement for it unless you understand that the Declaration of Independence is the enforcement for the Constitution to throw off such government or alter or abolish such government.
No, I apologize, I lost the question. What I just posed to you? Hello.
See, as the authorities, we can do anything we want. We don't have to ask our politicians for anything. We have the authority to give them orders. And if they don't obey our orders, we can fire all of them.
And what does that look like, John?
What does that look like? It
Yeah.
looks like forming that organization of the 300 million of us to supervise our elected servants and our appointed servants, like judges,
Well, right
who
now,
are acting as enemies of the people of the United States.
well, I can tell you that what you're telling us now has been practiced and tried many, many times and gone nowhere. What do you do next?
You keep trying. You
Okay.
get it done. You don't let lawyers interfere with the process, or Democrats or Republicans. You have to assert yourself as the highest authority in the country and embrace that attitude. That's what all of us are.
Well, I wish you every success in that effort.
Well,
Go
you
ahead,
don't want
Gerhard.
freedom if you don't embrace that attitude yourself. You're opposed to freedom.
No, I'm not opposed to freedom. I'm opposed to your tactic, and I'm going to use a different tactic to try to achieve the same goal.
Well, you're being subservient to your servants.
Can
That's
I come in
not
here?
a good thing
Can
to
I
do.
come in here?
John, I think we've hit the wall here, so let's let someone else speak, please.
Yep.
Let me come in. I'm 92 years old, and I'm listening to both of you. I see more chance of getting somewhere with the approach of working with New Hampshire. I wish John greatest luck in getting 300 million to do what he wants, but it is somewhere in a cloud. We need real action. We are in a real emergency. Let's support what is happening in New Hampshire every way we can so that we are making changes. I see no changes in the way John is doing wishful thinking. I appreciate his sentiment, but this is the advice from somebody who's been around for more than 92 years.
Thank you.
Anyone else have any commentary, questions for Daniel?
Yeah,
I
I have a
was.
question.
Oh,
Go ahead, Frank.
All right. You
John.
said you became a citizen of New Hampshire.
Correct.
You didn't say you became a citizen of the United States. By becoming a citizen of New Hampshire, you became a citizen of the United States, or no?
Let me try to make it as simple as possible. The word citizen of the United States, as it appears in the US Constitution itself, refers to citizens of the states, all the way to the 14th Amendment, right? The 14th Amendment didn't create a new class of citizenship, but rather federal jurisdiction where it previously did not exist, right? 14th Amendment, I think I have it memorized, says the following.
Wait, I understand you. I understand you. Okay. My problem is I'm from New York and I came here 7 years ago. Now, you said I have to be here 2 years to be a citizen of New Hampshire.
No,
Do
that
I
was
really?
the original law.
What?
That was the original law. The last time there was a law on the books in New Hampshire was in 1973 that had a 6-month residency requirement. So if you moved here from New York, you'd have to reside within the state for 6 months, and then you'd swear an oath to the state constitution and the US Constitution, and that would make you a citizen thereof.
Okay. So, but I've lived here more than 6 months, but I haven't sworn that oath yet. Should I go down to City Hall and swear the oath?
Right
Yes.
now, there's no provisions. I would recommend that you do so, but you don't need to do it that way. And let me explain. Right now, going back to the original law is that it simply required that you swear the oath before someone authorized to administer such an oath. Now, currently, that means a notary. You can go down to your local bank. We have a template on cosnh.com. You can download the template, go to the bank, or go to a notary if you have a friend and want to go through that process, swear your oath, and that would bring you into compliance with what's coming down the pike. Secretary of State Bill Gardner and I have become very friendly. There's already a state ID. Where they're going with this is that the residency requirement is going to lead to you becoming a state citizen, getting a state ID, making you a state citizen.
Okay. Thank you.
And
Right.
only state citizens can vote.
Frank, did you
That's
have
why you
something?
want to do so.
yeah, I was just going to ask sort of a more general question. I mean, I'll preface with saying, as a lawyer, I'm licking some wounds here. I've been hammered up and down. So where do you ultimately see so maybe another way to ask it? What's the ideal sort of scenario for Dan? What do you envision? What would be sort of the really optimal outcome with all this, this effort, and from your kind of, your perspective on our roots, where we should be. Where are you hoping this leads to? Is it secession? I'm just curious, sort of, you could sum up kind of what your ultimate goal is here.
No, absolutely. It's an excellent question. My ultimate goal is simply to restore the rule of law, restore the state constitution and the binding elements of it, where what we have now, I'm going to open up a can of worms here, but I didn't go down this road, and we can have this conversation at a later date. Most people are unaware that the federal government has destroyed the sovereignty of all 50 states, and they all operate as franchises of the federal government. And this has all been done by bribing the states with federal tax dollars, right? So they start a program that isn't authorized by the state constitution, withdraw the federal funds, leaving the state to have. Right now, if you go to the executive branch under our state government, you're going to find that there are 250 agencies that were propped up by that exact method. So now what we're headed is, I want to destroy restoring the voting law will destroy most of this, because what we're dealing with is a state within the state. Does anyone understand the concept?
I think so.
So what's happened is that the state within the state, the state government no longer operates as a constitutional instrument. It operates strictly as a franchise of the federal government, dependent on the Federal Reserve System for its bailout and continued function. So where I want to go is repeal 3 specific things that I think will take a step back down a path of restoring the rule of law in the state. One is restore the lawful voting laws. Like I said, Bill Gardner's on board with that. Restore the sovereignty of the state, demolish the state, this new entity, the statutory state. And 3, get rid. I hate the 2-party system. I'm advocating the destruction of the 2-party system. That's another conversation. I'm sorry that doesn't answer all your questions as succinctly, but my ultimate goal is to restore the government back to its constitutional roots.
More
Thank
power to you. More power to you.
All right, and just to note that cosnh.com is down right now. I kind of went in the back way to find a few of the things I was sharing today, but you can go there and sign up, and give them your name. And I'm sure that as we get down the road, we'll have Daniel back if he's open to that, to do part 2, part 3, whatever it is that we need to know.
Yeah.
Let me ask you, Daniel, just one other question. Because you were talking about Anna von Reitz and the state assemblies. Becky, Johanna wants to ask, just let me get this question out, and then we'll let Johanna talk. Having to do with, you were saying that they were trying to, those state assemblies were trying to do something that they can't do. Can you just go back and repeat what you said, and just tell us what it is they should be doing that they're not doing?
Well, what they're doing is they're advocating a national citizenship. They're calling themselves American nationals, which is slang for a state citizen. That's what it technically means. And they're half right in where they're looking at. They understand that the original instrument, the federal government, created as a body corporate, has now been completely taken over by the Federal Reserve System and in all of its tentacles and how it functions. And so what they're doing is they're convinced, like, you don't need a driver's license and you don't need to comply with state law. Well, what good does it do if you're going to change your status and you're still going to be subject to the laws of the state, if you're going to play games and just go off and create your own party? That's all they've done.
So they would need to do something more on a state level, that like you're doing. Is that what you're saying?
Well, more than that, because they have no standing. How can you claim that which has never existed? There's no such thing. In other words, back to the question about citizen of the United States. Citizen of the United States, on my naturalization certificate says that I'm a citizen of the United States of America. It's being specific. America is the last word. The words in front of it, the prefix is the modifier, right? Knowing the history on the subject, citizen of the United States has always meant a state citizen. Washington, D.C. is not a state, is it? It doesn't have a state constitution. It doesn't elect members to Congress or to the Senate. So how can you be a federal citizen? You can't. There's no such thing. So whether you do it Judge Anna's way or you do it the corrupt way, then that's the path they're going down.
Go ahead, Johanna.
Okay, so my question, at the beginning,
You're
you were,
gonna have to be loud.
okay, at the beginning, you were talking about some of the actions you're taking. And I'm wondering now with all of these draconian things that are coming down from the states and ours too as well. So what do you feel is the most important way that we can now assert our rights as state citizens in regard, say, to COVID and all? What's the program here a little bit more?
Yeah, no, excellent question. So my plan moving forward is a 10-county plan. The 10 counties is to create 5 committee men in all 5 counties, committee men, committee women, and start growing the knowledge base, because none of this becomes tangible until enough people are awake to make a political movement. There's also, I attended a Republican assembly several weeks ago, a tri-county assembly. And that tri-county assembly was so disgusted with the function of the GOP, they got rid of the Republican name. They are now calling themselves the Tri-County Patriot Assembly. Now, this is before the disrespectful executive council putting a corrupt man on the bench. This is before the Republican GOP blowout on Saturday. This is how disgusted they are. So what I'll be doing behind the scenes, I've already got half the state ready to jump ship and divorce the GOP. I'm advocating that we divorce the GOP by creating a real conservative platform that is predicated strictly on the state constitution only, and not about all kinds of things that usurp the power of the Constitution. So that's my goal.
Thank you. Anybody else have any comments or questions?
By the way, you're free to give out my name and contact information to any of your group if they have questions they want to take offline.
Okay, great. Thank you.
So, thank you so much, Daniel. This has been very informative and really so important. What I would like to ask is, when you started out, you were talking about the fraud in the election. And can you just, I don't know, just like quickly go back to that for a minute and say why that was fraud? Because they set their own, the governor and the legislator set their own, some sort of rules or something like that?
Yes, yeah, the right to vote is derived from the Constitution itself. Don't you think all of us on this call, if we wrote a document and said, this is how we're going to elect our public officials, that our public officials should honor that? Right? That's what the contract says, that we have a social compact that says everyone agrees to live under this compact called the state constitution. And if the people said only inhabitants are qualified to vote, but the legislature goes behind our back. That's what they did. They went behind our back, and the Republicans passed House Bill 1264. House Bill 1264, it commingles the word resident with the word inhabitant. And it says that if you're one of the two and you establish a domicile, you can vote. Well, hold on a second. There's no provision in the Constitution granting the right to vote to a resident alien who's a US citizen. And further, there is no provision in the US Constitution granting you the right to vote. Did you know that? That right is actually reserved in Article 1, Section 2 of the US Constitution that says the people of the several states shall select their representatives. And those people will be defined as citizens of the United States, reaffirming the state citizenship concept, right? Remember, when this is written in 1788, they're in Philadelphia. Washington, D.C. doesn't exist. The first assembly will assemble in New York for the first Congress with George Washington at the helm. So the US Constitution has always said the same thing. The right to vote emanates for the same reason by the people who wrote the instrument. The people who wrote the state and US constitutions said the people who wrote the document will define how they elect their public representatives, not the other way around. Now what we have is the legislature is going around the Constitution. Let's look at this summer. House Bill 1266, using the cover of COVID, expanded absentee voting because the state constitution is very strict. We normally have only a 4% turnout in absentee voting because in order to vote absentee under the Constitution of New Hampshire, you have to be one, already registered to vote, and you know that you will be out of town and you obtain an absentee ballot because you know that you'll be gone. One. Number two, you have a physical disability that makes it impossible for you to attend in person. You're registered to vote. Those people can get an absentee ballot because they've done what? They've made a provision for them to vote away from the ballot box. That leads to a 4% turnout. So what, under the cover of COVID, they expanded absentee provisions for religious exemptions. If your boss won't let you off work, if your babysitter backs out on you and you have dependent care for child care, senior care, or because you're scared of COVID. All those reasons turned the absentee turnout by Bill Gardner's numbers himself to 30.4. And now the governor has gone one step further by executive action. He's now going to let the towns either postpone their vote or do it by mail-in, and or to continue these. Again, you've changed the absentee provisions of the Constitution and used a fake medical event. Listen, there is viruses all over the planet and we can't stop them. It's a lie to the American people that you will stop a virus. Every year we try to contain the regular flu and its mutations.
I hear 4 masks will do it. 4
Yeah.
masks. All right, so
The sin of our government is fundamentally this. I'm not going to knock the governor not knowing what to do within the first 21 days. I think everyone on the call can say, hey, he acted with prudence. He acted with just cause to be concerned for the health and safety. He didn't know it was Ebola. What if it was Ebola, right? I have no qualms about him doing the first act. But after that, he had provisions in the Constitution, he had a lawyer in his office, and he had an entire legal team called the Attorney General's office for them not to know that his duty lies with the Constitution itself, that he should have gone to the legislature and made his case. That's why it's called the General Court. That's why the legislature possesses the police power of the state. So what the judge did, Judge Kissinger, he screwed us all too. He was ignorant of the Constitution, and he did what? He let fraud be told upon the court and conveyed that message. And now they've continued down that path that the executive continues to exact the power restrained to the judicial branch. The governor should have gone to the legislature and said, hey, here's my evidence. Here's medical doctor so-and-so. Here's this expert. Here's this expert. And this is what we should do. And then the people collectively through the representatives could have said, all right, you've convinced us we need a mask ordinance. We need a vaccine for this problem. We need this or we need that. He could have resolved all of the angst. And by the way, he had a Democratic majority that would have given him everything he wanted. The Democrats already had a plan. I would argue this is a Chinese military attack, that we've been attacked by a virus that was engineered for this specific goal. And so
Hey, I like that.
I would argue that's exactly what's happened, because when you understand, see, I'm a veteran who was trained in the military to survive a biological, chemical, or nuclear attack. I know all about these types of things and how and why they work. So that's why I have a different perspective of what's happened here. But what did the governor do? He didn't do any of those things, and he's had a year to do it. Why didn't the Democrats? I'll argue there was a deal made. I'll argue there was $1.3 billion is the reason why. and go follow the money. And why didn't the Democrats, when the Democrats sued him in state court for control of the federal CARES money, it was a joke. The day before they were heard electronically before the court, they amended their complaint and they told the court, we confess that the Speaker of the House and the President of the Senate has no jurisdiction to bring an action. We have no standing. So we're going to amend our complaint and say that as concerned taxpayers. Well, hold on. The emergency statute provision had the authority that the Democrats could have taken control. They could have taken control of the money. They could have controlled and forced the vaccine and the mask, all of it, to achieve the Democratic agenda of this massive Ponzi scheme or this massive fraud that led to this vote. And I will argue that's how we flipped the place red. The deal was the Republicans will take the state and the Democrats will get all the federal offices. So that's why we have all blue dogs going to federal offices. There's no way the state went red and sent all blue Democrats. There's no way. It's not possible. And by the way, this had nothing to do with the New Hampshire GOP. I argue they suck. And they suck because the place is blue. And so they're not going to solve our problems. And I'll say they're the problem. They're no different than the Democrats.
All right. Well, too bad you don't have any spit and fire. That's what we're looking for. Anyways, but really, really appreciate your time today. It was fascinating.
One more question.
Oh, go ahead.
So Daniel, how do we do this? How does this move forward so that the things that you're advocating, like you said, you need, some lawyers in court, right? To
Yep.
argue this? Yes.
Yes. And again, not all lawyers are bad. I have friends that are attorneys. I'm just disappointed
Right.
that within the legal profession, that there haven't been any of them that are capable, because as anyone who's practiced law knows, that it's one thing to learn the Constitution. It's another thing to learn the rules of the court and how the court functions. And so despite my education, I'm not there. I don't have any time bringing cases before the court. So I'm left hamstrung that way. But how do we move forward? We move forward by continuing to have these assemblies, by having these conferences and growing our numbers.
All right.
Because-
Well,
In the end, it comes down to the ballot box, doesn't it? What we vote for ourselves.
yeah, and hopefully we won't have to wait 2 years to get some redress for our grievances. So I just encourage people to go to cosnh.com, cosnh.com, and sign up for their newsletter. I'm sure their website will be back up at a certain point. I will definitely let everybody know about this video. And Daniel, do you have any final words for us today?
No, if anyone does have two specific skill sets, I know we had one attorney. Thank you for participating. If you can be of any assistance, that'd be wonderful. I'm looking for video production support.
Okay, good.
Because what I've been asked to do is, as you all got an earful from me this afternoon, when I turn on, it's like a fire hose. It's too much information all at once. And so I've been asked to break this all down into small sound bites, small 2, 3, 5 minute snippets. I can do the teaching. I need video production. So I need support for someone who, if I can film it, that's one thing. Who's going to produce it? Who's going to download it, go through the production process? Because then I would have to take the time from my research to educate myself on how to manage the software. And again, something I don't have practice at.
Okay. All right. Well, thanks again so much for your time today. Really appreciate it. And I'm going to just share my screen briefly again, just to remind people of where they can get information on the bills that are coming up. This is Health Freedom New Hampshire, hfnh.org. So click on bills when you get there. You'll see what's coming up here. There are things happening today, tomorrow, Wednesday, and upcoming. So definitely everybody needs to work their representatives. Every single person that hears this anywhere needs to make their voice heard. And then Rebuild New Hampshire, if you type in Rebuild NH, It shows reopened, but it's rebuildnewhampshire.com will get you there. If you click on these little things here, you'll see 2021 bills. And what you should basically do is just sign up for their newsletter, and they'll send you all the relevant information. I did send you in today's email as a 1 hour Zoom reminder. I did send you that information from their latest newsletter as well for things coming up this week. So please check in there, and we really appreciate it. All right. Thanks everybody for being here today.
Thank you.
Thank you again for inviting me. Appreciate it.
Thank you. That was
Thanks,
very,
Dan.
very helpful,
Thank you.
very enlightening. Yes. Thank
Thank
you.
you.